White Styrofoam. It's cheap and it's easy to use. Today we are going to talk about using it to create realistic scenery for model railroads. That's coming right up. Hi, I'm Roy Smith. I've been busy creating more scenery for the Pocatello subdivision on my N-scale layout this week. I want to share with you what I've done. In fact, that's what we do on this channel. We share the hobby of model railroading. So if you like to share the hobby, and if you're new here, why don't you just go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. Today's episode is the 10th in a series about the Pocatello sub. I've created a playlist containing all of the Pocatello episodes. I will put a link to that playlist in the description to this video down below. You can go back and watch any of the previous episodes just by clicking on that link. I considered various ways to build the terrain feature that I'm going to share with you today. For example, I thought about using plaster cloth stretched over cardboard lattice or over wadded up newspaper. I also thought about using some of that extruded pink styrofoam that Steve Brown of It's My Railroad sent to me last October. Ultimately, I decided to save the pink foam for an upcoming project and to use my old method of stacked up layers of white styrofoam to create the terrain feature that I'm going to show you today. Now, as we all know, white styrofoam is messy compared to extruded foam, but it's cheap, lightweight, and readily available, and I have used it successfully in previous scenery projects, including White Mountain, the cliffs at Echo Canyon, and shallow 3D scenery along the Pocatello subdivision. I always like to look at photos of the prototype I am modeling when doing just about anything on my layout. Here's the photo I used for today's project. The photo was taken along Interstate 15 near Income, Idaho, on the way to Pocatello. So here it is, the terrain feature that I created using white styrofoam. I'm going to show you how I created it. I hope the techniques I used will be useful as you create scenery on your own layout. I wanted to fill this space with terrain in a way that would provide some physical separation between Echo Canyon on my layout and the Pocatello sub. The first thing I did was to make a paper template. Making a template like this is a lot easier than trying to lay a big sheet of styrofoam on the layout to mark the size and shape for the first layer of styrofoam, especially when creating an unusual shape like this. I used a Sharpie to draw the size and shape of the first layer of styrofoam on a sheet of paper. And here's the template. And then I took the paper template outdoors and used it to draw my cut lines on a sheet of styrofoam. I cut the styrofoam with an old X-Acto knife and razor saw. I didn't want to cut or carve the white styrofoam indoors. Those little white beads of styrofoam would have gotten all over my layout and train room. And here's the first layer of white styrofoam. I will use it as a template for subsequent layers. At first I thought 3 layers would be just right, but then I decided to add 2 more layers. Again, my goal was to visually separate Echo Canyon and the Pocatello sub as effectively as I could in such a limited space. After cutting all of the layers, I glued them together, and after the glue had dried, I sanded the sides smooth to reduce the likelihood of getting beads of white styrofoam in my train room. What the heck is that? It looks like a UFO has landed on my layout. Well, it looks a little strange now, but stay with me. It will look like a natural terrain feature when I'm done, I promise. Notice the line I showed you previously that I drew on the bridge pier. I wanted the terrain to come down along that line, and sure enough, it does. Okay, I've taken the Styrofoam feature back outside to carve the cracks and crevices in it. I'm doing this over an open box so that most of the white beads fall into the box. That will make it easier for me to clean up my mess afterwards. I'm using an old X-Acto knife and razor saw to do this, just as I did when cutting out the layers of Styrofoam to begin with. It's amazing how hard it is to do this because of the glue. Well, there it is, back on the layout. Now it's time to seal it with a thin coat of sculpt mold. And now I'm using spackling paste around the bottom of the terrain feature to close the gap between it and the layout. I could have done this with the same sculpt mold, but sculpt mold takes forever to dry. As a footnote, I'm working on Echo Canyon Road at the same time. I want to make the road disappear from sight behind the cliffs of Echo Canyon. I will make the back of the terrain feature look like a rock cut. Now it's time to paint the terrain feature. As always, I begin with a base coat of desert yellow latex paint. I brush a little water onto it so that the paint doesn't hide the cracks and crevices. The desert yellow base coat has dried, so now I'm applying watered down earth tone pigments to the terrain feature. As always, I begin with the darker colors, especially in the cracks and crevices, and work my way toward lighter colors. The colors I use include black, stone gray, raw umber, yellow ochre, and white. I apply additional water to the terrain feature to get the pigments to blend together while they are still wet. Lastly, I'm applying textures and vegetation to the terrain feature. After dabbing on a 50-50 mix of white glue and water, I begin with the textures including buff colored ballast and Scenic Express real dirt. Then, after dabbing on more of that glue, I apply fine green and yellow grass. Eventually, I will apply static grass, shrubs, and a clump of small trees. As I said at the beginning, I like to use photos of the prototype for creating scenery on my layout. I don't know if my creation looks like the prototype or not, but I do know that I had a lot of fun trying to create something that resembles the prototype, more or less. It's always fun to share the hobby with you. Again, if you're new here, I invite you to subscribe and hit that little bell icon so that you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. Well, until next time, thanks for watching. Happy railroading. I'm Roy Smith, and I will see you again very soon.